achieving true autonomy. This concept is central to understanding Carl Jung's individuation process and fundamentally to help you unlock your sense of freedom in life. I'm going to go over this concept of autonomy. I'm going to use modern day psychological research and show you, and theory, motivational psychology theory, contemporary psychology, and link these ideas to the depths of Carl Jung's individuation process. And so I think this is useful to do because most people, I think, who maybe engage in Jung's work or are new to Carl Jung's work, it can be hard to understand the practicalities of how you actually live it in your actual life. This teaching will help you live this in your actual life because I'm going to use these concepts from motivational psychology, and actually I'm going to expand upon them and show you my insights into how they connect together to bring it down into something very specific that you can't really get anywhere else. Even if you go away and learn about these concepts by themselves, no one else has put them together like I have here today for you. Because I actually have been living this, thinking this, I've integrated this into my life, and I have a personal understanding. Let me even raise it a bit and call it a revelation of how significant these principles are for your life. So, and particularly for you to actually become who you are. Now that concept sounds a bit strange, and a lot of these ideas, a lot of these even Jungian concepts can sound like jargon when we talk about the self or the shadow. And I think the reason is because it's become a bit formulaic in how people talk about it. And especially followers of Jung, they talk about this stuff and it becomes a bit of a jargon. And because of that, it can sound a bit rigid or stiff and not really some of the way Jung intended it to be ends up being a little bit dogmatic, even though he did not intend it to be that way at all. He didn't intend it to be that way, but any type of jargon can get in the way of progress. That's why I like introducing these fresh ideas and approaching a similar topic in a new way. So through this, you are going to be able to achieve true autonomy. So we have to understand the concept of autonomy and how that impacts our self-development, how it impacts our sense of self, and ultimately leads to the realization of our ultimate identity and purpose in life. So let me read this quote from Carl Jung. And this really gets at the essence of what this teaching today is really about. So Carl Jung says in his collected works, in the development of personality, he says, "What is it in the end that induces a man to go his own way and to rise out of unconscious identity with the mass as out of a swathing mist? Not necessity, for necessity comes to many, and they all take refuge in convention. Not moral decision, for 9 times out of 10 we decide for convention likewise. What is it, then, that inexorably tips the scales in favor of the extraordinary? It is what is commonly called vocation, an irrational factor that destines a man to emancipate himself from the herd and from its well-worn paths. True personality is always a vocation and puts its trust in it as in God, despite it being, as the ordinary man would say, only a personal feeling. But vocation acts like a law of God from which there is no escape. The fact that many a man who goes his own way ends in ruin means nothing to one who has a vocation. He must obey his own law, as if it were a daemon whispering to him of new and wonderful paths. Anyone with a vocation hears the voice of the inner man. He is called. That is why the legends say that he possesses a private daemon who counsels him and whose mandates he must obey. Okay, let us analyze that a little bit. And then I'm going to tie in the idea of autonomy from contemporary motivational research. So this idea of Jung's here gets at the central point that I want to get across to you, is that there is a connection between your ultimate destiny, your ultimate purpose, right? These ideas that we think are wish-washy because we don't understand how they link back to our actual reality. But psychology helps us realize the significance of these ideas, realize the significance of your purpose, of your destiny. And that idea is understood through the idea of vocation. Now, Jung invokes this idea of vocation. He says, remember, what is it? What induces a man to go his own way and rise out of unconscious identity with the mass? So in other words, what enables someone, what enables someone to move from where they are in society, embedded in the world, embedded in their usual way of doing things? What leads them from breaking away from everyone else to go their own way? Jung's answer, vocation. So that means there's a process, right? Where there's a homogeneous mass. Everyone has these well-worn paths, Jung says. These well-worn paths are the different pathways that society approves of. And in today's world, a lot of the time, that is, you're picking a certain career and you're doing that. That is acceptable to most people in society. I am studying to be a doctor, and I'm not studying for too long. Now I am a doctor, because you don't want to be doing that in your 40s. So there's a sequencing, there's an expectation of society. I'm not saying what I believe right now. I'm saying what society believes. Society has particular beliefs of when you should do something at a certain age, at a certain time, what you should fulfill. You should be working on your career. You should be at this point in your life. You should have a family. I mean, those things are changing, the idea of family and all that. But having a relationship, even that, I guess, is changing as well. But the idea is that there are certain things that you should be focusing on. But what leads someone to break away from that? Because once you start turning away from what society expects, you receive a kind of hatred towards you. If you act differently to the norm, you will be treated as something other than. You will be treated as something that is not pursuing the goal everyone else is pursuing, which is some type of fuzzy, worldly type of success. I'm not saying that you cannot, achieve worldly success, but what I'm trying to do is focus on Jung's particular emphasis here in achieving success within your own personality, within your own self. That's where the true value comes from. That's why Jung said in that quote, true personality is always a vocation. So if you missed that little bit, you wouldn't have got the connection. But here's the connection. The vocation is not something outside of yourself, like a career path or whatever. It's something that connects. It actually is your personality. Jung says in that quote I read out, true personality is always a vocation and puts its trust in it as in God, despite its being, as the ordinary man would say, only a personal feeling. So there is an inner feeling that indicates to you that you have some type of calling, some type of vocation. And what is that? It is linked to your true personality. It is you. That's why it's a vocation. That's why it feels like a calling. Because it's intimately linked with your very sense of self and who you are, your identity. Your identity is important to individuation. Individuation is not something that you do outside of yourself, although it does mean that you have to contend with the world and you're doing things in your life. You're growing, you're living your life. But it's not something you do instrumentally or something you think propositionally that you can do with a scaffolding outside, that you can kind of quasi enter into it. You can't fake it. We're talking about your actual identity, your actual sense of self. Now, that might seem so hard to grasp in your actual life. That's why I want to bring the motivational psychology into it, because A, you know that this is contemporary science and it's studied. And this is some of the leading motivational psychology theory that is out there. So it's not nothing, and it helps you understand these more abstract psychodynamic Jungian ideas to bring them back into your everyday understanding so it seems practical and understandable. So follow along with me and you'll get the connections each step of the way. And every video I make, I'm making a conscious decision to try to step forward in some domain. And it might sound like sometimes I'm talking about the same thing, but I'm actually circling around these ideas because they're so expansive that there's things I've left out of the other videos that I have that need to be said in the particular video I'm doing now. This video now is going to focus on autonomy in the background, but I'm linking it to self-actualization, linking it to you living out your purpose and you becoming your true self, because it all links together. Okay, so autonomy, right? Let's talk about that for a little bit and talk about it in relation to you becoming yourself and you living out your vocation in life. Okay, number one, in motivational psychology, there's the idea, particularly that comes out of self-determination theory, which is a leading theory in motivational psychology. One of the postulates of that theory is that there are different psychological needs and that fuel motivation. And so one of those psychological needs is the need for autonomy. So just like we have physical needs, we need food, we need water. When I need water, that drive is activated to fulfill that need because I biologically need that to be fulfilled. It's the same psychologically with these needs. You psychologically are driven to have this need met. If you do not have the need for autonomy met, most likely you will have an absence of motivation. You have nothing pulling you towards or driving you in the direction of the thing that is that you're to be motivated for, because you will not be having your psychological need met. Now, there's different psychological needs. There's 3 postulates: autonomy, the need for autonomy, the need for a relationship or connection, and the need for competence, to feel competent. Now, I'll talk about the other 2 in future videos, but we're going to focus on autonomy, because if you really break it down, and I've been thinking about this is some of my own unique insight on this, that links with self-determination theory that I've learned from the foundations of that theory. Because number 1, why is this a psychological need? Well, think from first principles. What Ryan and DC did when they came up with self-determination theory and they came up with these needs, they thought from first principles of what an organism's psychological needs would be. So if you think of yourself as an organism, you came from your mother. You have a separate body from your mother. Just as a first principle, you are your own organism. You at least perceive yourself that way, right? You are your own person. You perceive yourself that way. And that is because you have split off as a separate self, as a separate organism from your mother, right? So you have and you need autonomy. You need, as a precondition for you to be your own self-sustaining organism, you need autonomy. Autonomy is a precondition for you to live a good and healthy life as an organism. And there's lots of contemporary research on that autonomy, the need for autonomy, when it's fulfilled in your life, it maximizes your well-being, which is basically a buzzword for you feeling right, feeling good in your life, right? So happiness, well-being, satisfaction, that comes through being autonomous. This is a fundamental psychological need that all organisms need in their life. So now we understand a bit about the fundamental aspect. I want to talk a little bit more specifically about, how it is understood in the psychological literature. So it's a psychological need, as I said. Now, what this need does is, as you have autonomy, it actually is linked to your perception of the causality of your actions. So if it's called perceived locus of causality, so when you perceive as an individual that you are the one causing your actions, then you feel autonomous. In other words, nothing from the outside is pressuring you, coercing you, telling you that you need to be in a certain way. You yourself, within yourself, see yourself out of your own inner volition that you want to be and do and think in a particular way. And as you perceive yourself doing those things, you perceive that the causality, what is causing you to do these things, is coming from within you. That is the theory behind contemporary motivational psychology as it pertains to autonomy. So they call that the individual's perceived locus of causality. In other words, you perceive the causality of your behaviors and actions, thoughts and feelings as coming from yourself. It is motivated from within you. You are causing this to happen. You wanted to make this choice and do this thing that you were doing. And because you've chosen it, you feel a connection to it. because you've chosen it, you identify with that action. There you go. There's the link that I want you to make. That's the link between the idea of autonomy and the formation of your identity. So as you are a separate organism, you will build up your own identity through observing your freely acted out actions. Because we can act in ways that are in accordance to other people's instructions. But we know if we act that out, that isn't us. That's because of something else. Now that goes back to what Jung, that first quote, why I read that out is that is fundamental at understanding you have a calling, you have a vocation. But remember what he said before that. What induces a man to go his own way? It is not necessity. That's what he says. It is not moral decision, then he says. Right? Why? Because those two things, necessity and moral decision, they have to do with the circumstances of the outer world, of the demands of life. They're not from your inner world, from your inner life. In other words, if someone has to do something because of necessity, for example, they might have to go to work, which is the case for most of us, if not all of us. Out of necessity, you have to do such and such, or out of moral decision, or to be in alignment with societal's moral framework for how you should be acting according to society's expectations. If you are acting out of that, that's not what triggers you to go your own way. What triggers you to go your own way is a sense of vocation and calling within you. Now, this is why I like to talk about autonomy, because it is the practical understanding to help you understand how to live that out, how to live the vocation you're calling out. Otherwise, it's still, although it's tried to be made, Jung tried to make it understandable, I still think because of the world we live in now, we still have a disconnect between vocation and calling. We can understand that is kind of the motif that comes upon one. That's how it feels. It feels like a calling. It feels like a vocation. But your rational mind, I think, will still resist this. That's why Jung basically said it's an irrational factor, right? It's an irrational factor that destines a man to emancipate himself from the herd and from its well-worn paths. So what I'm trying to do by introducing you to the idea of self-determination theory, of the need for autonomy, is I'm trying to show you the practical way to live out your vocation and your calling. Because really linked to autonomy is the idea of intrinsic motivation. And I've talked about this again and again in lots of my videos. But the more I circle around it, the more I talk about it, the more I articulate it, it becomes more and more central, more and more powerful, more and more the thing that is going to unify your inner and outer world and help you actually individuate in a practical sense, helping you understand it in a way where it actually is even researched in modern psychology. And you cannot ignore it because it is within your domain of experience. So therefore, there's a shut case as to how real it is. It is vital to your experience, and it is the pathway to help you ground and actualize the higher concepts of individuation and your identity of who you are, to become yourself. This is how you do it. You live according to intrinsic motivation. Now, intrinsic motivation is a concept in motivational psychology, which means that you are motivated to do a task, not for any outward reason, not for a reward, not because you're going to get punished, not for anything outside yourself, not because of society's expectations, not because of any coercion, pressure, or punishment. But you are intrinsically motivated means that some factor within yourself wants to do a particular task or be a particular way in the world for the sake of it, because you enjoy it. You enjoy the task itself. You're not doing it for anything outside of the task, not for a benefit, not for a reward. You're doing it because you enjoy it. Now, what does that mean? Let's explore that and expand that. You enjoy it. So you identify with it somehow. Some part of you, in you, is congruent with the thing outside of you. And that gets into self-determination theory. The reason why we are self-determined to do something or to behave or motivated to achieve something or act in a certain way, if we are self-determined, it's because the thing that we are self-determined to do is perceived as an aspect of ourselves. It's perceived as something we truly value, we identify with. It is an extension, a part of your identity. And that links into the idea of joy, playfulness, having fun, and being creative. You have fun because you are in harmony with the thing you're having fun with. Not everyone enjoys the same thing. Not everyone has fun in the same way because not everyone is the same person. So there's an intimate link between your intrinsic self, your identity, your values, and your intrinsic motivation to do things. So every time you do something because you want to do it, you enjoy it. It's not because you're doing something for someone else or not because of something is outside of you. It's because your inner structure somehow corresponds with the thing that you want to do. You identify with it. It is a part of you. Remember, go back to what Jung said in that thing. That's why I read out that quote, because that quote in the beginning contains so much gold. But it's only little. If you miss certain aspects, you just miss it and you miss the insight. But I called it out before, I'm going to call it out again. He said, true personality is always a vocation and puts its trust in it as in God. So your personality, the very structure of who you are, becoming yourself. What does that mean? Oh, it's nothing. No, it's not. It's not nothing. I'm showing you now how it literally links to everything you ever have done in your life that you've seen congruent and linked to your own self-identity. If you have done something out of your own volition, your own sense of doing, your own liking, you then can see and build up and see and perceive your own identity, your own values, who you really are. You then are self-determined to do that because it's not some task outside of you have to do. It's something that you see as an aspect of yourself. And this deeply ties into the idea of congruency. And this is about what true personality formation and development is about. Jung always phrases it in the words of developing your personality. But what is that? That can be hard to understand. But as I've said in other videos, other teachings, your personality is a configuration of particular patterns that endure across time. That's how we measure personality scientifically. And so you are a pattern of mind. But as we live in life, you might be able to see a disconnect between the inner aspects of yourself and how you behave outwardly. What I'm trying to do is trying to show you how you can be more congruent. And that idea of intrinsic motivation is how you can become congruent. Because the more you act in accordance to being intrinsically motivated, the more you are in alignment, your actions, your behaviors, your thoughts, your feelings, the expressions of self are now in alignment with the inner pattern, the inner innate structure of who you are. So to become yourself is to become more congruent. Now I've given you a practical way to do that. To act out of intrinsic motivation instead of extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation is when you act according to rewards, act because of something outside yourself, because you're going to get money or something, or you're going to get social recognition. Now, let me read a part of this, research paper about autonomy, because I think it's just so powerful. Autonomy is the basic need to be self-directed and to feel self-determined. Similarly, autonomous motivation refers to the perception of volition, choice, and personal causation in an activity, as opposed to feeling pressured, constrained, restrained, or coerced. People feel autonomous when they do the things they enjoy or find important and valuable. For these reasons, motivational autonomy is critically related to interest and engagement with the task at hand. Similarly, dispositional autonomy is related to psychological well-being, presumably because those high in dispositional autonomy tend to be self-congruent in their feelings, thoughts, and actions. That is, they select goals, activities, and courses of action that are consistent with their fundamental needs and preferences. This process facilitates growth and self-integration, i.e., self-concordance or self-coherence. And instead of perceiving their self-worth as contingent upon self-approval and meeting expectations, autonomously functioning individuals feel free to express who they really are. Now, do you see how that journal article, that research paper, that description of autonomy fits what Jung was talking about what induces a man to go his own way? And it is a sense of the person's vocation, their calling. Because this is how you understand your calling. This is how you find your calling. You have to be autonomous. You have to undergo the hero's journey. You have a journey ahead of you. You're not going to be trapped at home, bound with the mother. You're not going to be there. You're going to leave the family, leave the safety and security of the relationships you have. And you're going to go out on your own in an adventure. That's the mythological motif. That's the mythological element of it. But in scientific breaking it down language, in motivational psychology, we can see it as intrinsic value and also as the need for autonomy. And so let me go back through some of these points because they're so important to capture, right? So number one, it's a basic need. We've gone over that. Autonomy is the basic need to be self-directed, to feel self-determined. So in other words, how are you going to go your own way? How are you going to do something separately to what other people expect you of? Well, you have to have a sense of autonomy. You have to feel like your actions are autonomous. And that is juxtaposed to being controlled or coerced. You don't follow someone else. You don't follow advice of someone else. Ultimately, you have to do something for yourself. Actually live your actual life. Apart from what anyone else says. And all the way down to the basic sense of acting autonomously. So you can enter into this right now. You can act autonomously right now. You can, you can follow up or take up the call of adventure right now by acting autonomously and being self-directed and self-determined in what you're doing. Okay, similarly, autonomous motivation refers to the perception of volition. So you have to perceive, it's about your perception of how much it's out of your own vocation. See that how interesting that volition, vocation, they sound very similar in some sense, It's out of your own volition, out of your own choice, it says. That is how often when you make a choice, and it's you that is making the choice, and you see yourself making the choice, you then have buy-in. You buy into that choice. But what do you buy into that choice with? You're buying into that choice with your sense of identity, because you're trying to be congruent. You now see yourself as who has chosen a particular choice. You're building the formation of your identity through your actions, through your choices. And if you perceive yourself to have choices, then you perceive yourself to have autonomy. If you have no choice, you're controlled, you're constrained, right? So you have to see yourself as the personal causation of the activity you are doing. It's not because you're pressured into it. It's because you yourself have chosen to do something, right? And what's interesting there is it says people feel autonomous where they do things they enjoy or find important and valuable. See how it's not just about doing something on the outside. It's not some propositional thing that a scaffolding of some idea on the surface of I'm choosing this. No, it actually has to be lived. And it actually has to connect to your actual structure of personality, because it says that you actually only feel autonomous. You feel autonomous when you do things you enjoy and you find important and valuable. So, but ask the question, why do you find something important? Why do you find something valuable? Different people find different things important. Different people value different things. Again, this is hinting at the structure of who you are, your innate personality, your true personality, as Jung says, is a particular structure, a particular pattern of mind. That structure has a particular interest. Interest is what beckons you towards your calling. You are interested in something. You don't know what captures your interest, but something does capture your interest. And in some sense, this links to, John Vervaeke's idea of relevance realization, right? You don't know how you find something relevant in amongst all this stuff, but something is significant, and something about that relevance, about what piques your interest, connects to the intrinsic structure of your identity and who you are to become yourself. So that's why it also links to say something like Joseph Campbell when he says, follow your bliss. And he says, be sensitive to those inner, what really, turns you on kind of thing, because something will interest you, something will capture you. That's what it is. So in other words, you have to be autonomous to follow your interest. If you were completely controlled and all your actions were controlled and constrained, you wouldn't be following your interest. You'd just be dictated and following what you're told to do. That's not living in accordance with your interest. That's not following the little sparkling star that leads you to your destiny. So in other words, you have to be autonomous. It's a precondition to actualization. So you have to take up the call to adventure and be autonomous, right? This is a fundamental need that must be met for your self-realization. Because as you are allowed to be autonomous, right? You're not controlled, you're not constrained. Out of that autonomy, you will act. Something will come up. You will become interested in something. And that interest says something about you. It says something about the structure of who you are. That's why it's so important to self-reflect and undergo self-discovery to analyze what you're interested in and what you really value. This idea of values is critical, right? What you find important and what you find valuable. So what you find the thing about the world is everyone has advice on 1,001 things, but no one actually gets down to the point of saying, but people value different things and you have to discover your unique values. Discovering your unique values is akin to discovering your own law, your own way, your vocation, your principle, your purpose. It's akin to understanding what is good for you specifically, not related to other people. You have different values to other people. Me and you share different value structure. We have different underlying values. But values are not just propositional ideas. They're not something that just lay in the propositional overlay of something you thought up in your mind magically. It's not nothing. It actually is linked again down to your innate structure, right? Because what you value is what you will enjoy, is what is good for you. That's another element, a good way to think about it. Jung talked about feeling. Those who excel in the domain of feeling understand what is good for them. They understand what harmonizes with their innate structure. Whereas people who often are good thinkers, they negate how they feel. They don't know what's good for them, but they can think through things and they can see, logical connections between things. What things are out there, what is. But they don't actually understand how they feel about it. They can understand what something is by thinking about it, but they don't understand how that thing harmonizes with themselves. In other words, a really good feeler, someone in touch with their feelings, understands what's good for them. What is them? Their identity, their sense of self, their true self. So if you want to take up your vocation, you're going to have to discover your values, because your values are guides to what is good for you. Your values are guides to how to live out your vocation, to get that sense of feeling of what is right, what is the right direction, which way should I go, here or there. When you understand your values, they're not something that sits over you as a dogmatic thing that you live out, but it's something that you deeply connect with that reveals your sense of connection to how you should be living, how you should actually live out your life. Your values are an indication of that. So self-discovery is important, and you need to be autonomous to be able to discover your values. Otherwise, you'll only ever think that what you value is what someone else has told you, or what you value comes from, some religious or societal structure. But it's not that. Your values don't come from that. Your values come from your innate structure within you that connect to your unique individuality. Because you have something within you that is so specific. Your individuality is a particular structure that demands a particular way of relating to the world and harmonizing with the world. That's what values are. They enable you to know how you harmonize with the world and what's good for your actual sense of self. Now, let's read this quote from Jung and see how we can get here. This is what Jung says in his book, Alchemical Studies. He says, "The way is not without danger. Every good is costly, and the development of personality is one of the most costly of all things. It is a matter of saying yay to oneself, of taking oneself as the most serious of tasks, of being conscious of everything one does, and keeping it constantly before one's eyes in all its dubious aspects. Truly a task that taxes us to the utmost." So you can see there the weight and importance Jung puts into what he calls the development of personality, right? And he basically says, he's saying that to go on this journey to develop your personality, it's dangerous, it's costly, it's heavy, it's big, it's important, right? Because it means that you actually are breaking away from society's view, expectation of you. You are actually becoming yourself, because it says it's a matter of saying yay to oneself. You have a full commitment to yourself, right? That is what it means to live your values. That's what it actually means. You have a commitment to yourself. No matter the challenges you face, no matter pressure from the outside, you live according to your values, because your values are an extension. They are you. Your values are who you really are and how you should live as the person that you are. So let's move to the next quote here, right? And so as you live out those values, there'll be a cost, because your values will not align with other people's values. You will be shunned. You will be excommunicated from certain places in society because you will follow and have a commitment to yourself. But as you follow that commitment to yourself, as you do that, you will be living out intrinsic motivation. You'll feel a sense of happiness, a sense of joy, because you're living congruently. Your inner and outer worlds, your inner and outer identity are congruent. They're one and the same. They're expressing the same identity, the same sense of self. You are self-actualizing actually in the real world, in real life. How you think, how you talk, how you speak, everything you say, believe, and act on is authentic. You're living the authentic life. You're authentically living. You're being who you really are. That's not something that is flippant or on the surface. You can't just be who you are. It's actually a massive process. It actually requires the development of your personality, as Jung puts it. You actually need to undergo a development process so you actually can be authentic, so you can live the truth of your real identity. It's not easy because it's challenging, because the world doesn't want you to be who you really are. The world wants you to be what they are. They want to shape you from the outside. They don't want intrinsic motivation. They want extrinsic motivation. They want to give you rewards. They want to punish you. They want to put whatever there is to control you, to coerce you, so you can be like them. So you can be a part of the homogeneous mass, because they reward mediocrity and homogeneity. They love everything being the same. They don't want to see anyone stick their head up above anyone else. But you're special because you've sought this much. You've listened this far. You've sought this hard to try to understand how it is you can actually live out the individuation process. How it is you can actually be yourself and become yourself. You have to discover your values and live by them, and live by them ferociously. That's what enables you to be and achieve true autonomy. You have a self-realization of who you are and what you value. By going out and taking the call of adventure and being autonomous, you discover and perceive how you act and your intrinsic innate ways of relating to the world. And as you do that, you discover your values and you reflect on yourself. And as you discover your values, you live by them. You commit to them as a vocation. You commit to them as a calling, as a destiny, as a personal inner law that you live by. And as you connect to that, as you connect to your values, you live in truth. You live in real freedom. You are truly free. You are set free from the world because you now are a living sacrifice. You're living as yourself. No one can stop you. No one can do anything to you. No one can stop you from being yourself. Even if they kill you, your very last moment, And your commitment to yourself is unhinged and unfazed. You go out in a blaze of glory because that's who you are. So despite the consequences, despite the danger, you have to commit to yourself. So that means the self-reflection, the self-discovery is so important, because you better be committing to something you've really reflected on, that you've really seen and identified as yourself. You will not compromise. You will not bend the knee. You will not, listen to other people. You will not be distracted by some other path. Once you realize and see your values, see who you are, see that sense of identity within you, and you see yourself living it out through intrinsic motivation, wow, I enjoy this. I am living naturally in accordance, in harmony, in congruence in my inner and outer world, living out my true identity of who I really am, because I actually feel connected to what I'm doing. It's a power. And you can feel it. You can feel the power. And when you speak about the things you're passionate about, when you speak about things you authentically care about and value, it comes through. It comes through as an effect, as a feeling toned effect. So you discover your values through those inner senses of your feeling. Now let's get down into this a little bit more. Right? So let me read this quote by Jung, and then we're going to get into that, the feeling. There's a quote from Jung from Alchemical Studies. It's another one a little bit further down from the other quote I read out. It says, "The individual must devote himself to the way with all his energy, for it is only by means of his integrity that he can go further, and his integrity alone guarantee that his way will not turn out to be an absurd misadventure." So if you're scared right now, you're worried, I don't know, I don't know if I can commit and do this. No, you have to be completely on board with yourself, right? There's no, split mind on this. You're completely congruent. You must devote yourself to your own way with all of your energy, with all of your intensity. As you do this, you have to live what Jung says with integrity. Now, what that means is you are living with integrity in accordance to your own self. You're not betraying yourself. And in the Bible, actually, it says to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Now, the idea of righteousness is very similar to what Jung's talking about here with integrity. Righteousness is right living. But right living in accordance to what? Right living in accordance to the kingdom. And psychologically, we know that's a symbol for the deep value within our soul. So you live in accordance with your soul, because the kingdom is within. The kingdom is not found outside in some worldly pleasure. It's the true value that's within your soul. That's why it's the treasure hidden in the field, and that's why in the parables it says basically the person who finds this, the kingdom is like someone who finds a treasure, that's so valuable, they sell the whole field so they can basically keep this treasure. So nothing is more valuable than your true sense of self. Do not sell yourself out, right? And don't be scared that it's going to be a misadventure, because you have to commit. If you commit fully to yourself, it will work out. That's what it means. But it doesn't mean it will work out in a way where everything's going to be pleasant, right? Because life isn't pleasant. There's a lot of things that are harsh, a lot of things that are troublesome, but it will work out in the sense that at the end of it, you will become yourself. You will achieve the mission and the vocation you set out to achieve. You will undergo the personality development, the end result, the outcome of that personality development, which in some ways we say self-actualization. You will completely realize your full potential. That's another way to say it. You will do that. You will achieve that in all its good and its bad. But it doesn't matter, because if you don't do that, you still get good and bad, but you didn't live out your full potential. You didn't actually become who you really were. You lived out a fake life, and it was hollowed out, and you still experienced good and bad. So you're going to experience good and bad anyway. You might as well completely be yourself and be committed to yourself. And there's actually like a treasure in that is worth, any amount of suffering. There's a joy in it that's worth any amount of suffering. Okay, let me read this other quote, and then we'll lead to a close here, and I'll have to probably, expand on some of these ideas in future videos. But here it is. Here's a quote from Jung from his book, Psychological Types. He says, "The primordial images are, of course, just as much ideas as feelings. Fundamental ideas like God, freedom, and immortality, are just as much feeling values as they are significant ideas." Okay, so this is where the correspondence between the archetypal aspect of the psyche and our inner introspection of our feeling values coincide. That's why Jung said, that's why I had that quote, which, remember, everything's packed into that first quote, is that, Jung talks about and says, true personality is always a vocation and puts its trust in it as in God, despite it being, as the ordinary man would say, only a personal feeling. So it's through these feeling values that you discover yourself. So you might be asking, how do I discover my values? It's through self-introspection. It's through self-discovery that you uncover your values. And how you detect it is it comes up as a feeling value. These are inner feelings that will come up, but they coincide with the primordial images. They coincide with archetypal structures. So in another way, archetypes have been said to be these mythological motifs, these narrative forms that we live out. In other words, we are influenced from the unconscious somehow. We are unconsciously living a particular motif. We're living out a particular archetypal structure in our life. And that coincides with these feeling values. That coincides with this identity that's being revealed, that you reveal through self-introspection and self-reflection. That's why there's that other quote where you must be conscious of all your actions that you do. As you're conscious of all your actions, you build up that sense of personal identity. Now, the interesting thing is, if it was only about building up your ego identity, you could stop right there. But adding a layer of complexity at the very end of this video here is basically, because I've struggled with this idea, because when we understand the idea of autonomy and all that, you can see it as it relates to your personal self and your experience. But one might ask, but what about God's will? Or what about, the self in Jung psychology or the archetypes and the unconscious? How do we connect to the collective unconscious? And part of that, I thought, as it connects to this idea of autonomy, is you can't be controlled. Jung psychology is actually that you divest yourself from the outside influence, but actually also from the inner influence in a destructive way. So in other words, you're not controlled from the outside by society, but also you're not just transfixed by some archetypal image that you're stuck in this kind of influence, transfixed by, say, when someone's like possessed by like a religious idea or something. That also was not an ideal state, but somehow we need a relationship with the unconscious. So autonomy in this sense, I think, is recognizing that your consciousness, your conscious sense of self has its own autonomy to a certain scope. And, if you weren't free, you wouldn't be free to then develop a relationship with the unconscious. It's actually only the fact you have autonomy which indicates that you're something separate, that indicates that you have your own identity separate from the unconscious aspects of your life. But the idea of the ego being transformed is when you voluntarily choose to transcend, choose to surrender. You transcend the ego by voluntarily, autonomously, out of your own volition, surrendering to greater aspects of yourself that are found in the unconscious. So you actually use your autonomy to connect with the unconscious. You use your conscious mind to try to understand more about the aspects of yourself that you've left out. And as you do that voluntarily, as you take up that call to do that, you enter into a transformative process where your personality develops and grows into something bigger and larger, wider than it was. You actually undergo that personality development, and your identity is transformed to a new state, a new psychodynamic, a new relation between your conscious and unconscious. Because now you have accessed your transpersonal identity, because you're a wider sense of being. Now, this idea of intrinsic motivation, if you keep questioning it, you might ask, but as we said before, okay, I'm somehow interested in this. My inner structure somehow finds this intrinsically motivating. In the scientific way, we can analyze it how it's done in motivational psychology. But if you keep digging deeper through depth psychology, through, Jung's psychodynamic psychology, as we go deeper into it, you might ask the question, but what causes that intrinsic motivation? And then you say, well, it's linked to the structure of the intrinsic structure of the person, the personality. But what forms that intrinsic structure of that personality? Going even deeper, depth psychology. Well, some formation or pattern of mind came up from the unconscious. Your personality is like a complex. That's what, like Jung talked about. The ego is our central complex. And what is a complex? It's a certain pattern of mind that has, what Jung says, its own autonomy. Jung talks about autonomy in the context of complexes. And he says there's autonomous complexes that one has in our unconscious. So we have other personalities that are connected to us that we are actually not conscious of. They're autonomous. And so this is like the idea of having a split personality, right? Or having aspects of oneself that are cut off from oneself. So, ultimately, individuation is about becoming whole. So we actually integrate these other aspects of ourselves into our life. But ultimately, at whatever stage you're at, you have a sense of autonomy in yourself. But you are to come and have a relationship with the other autonomous aspects of yourself, to cause an integration of a sense of your personality. And so it is even out of our own autonomy that we have then relationship, because we need to be separate first to be an individual, to then actually come back to even having a relationship in the first place. So in other words, it's about rediscovering the aspects of yourself that are split off from yourself and becoming conscious of that. And that's how you become more whole and more of a whole person. And your self-identity is growing and is enlarged because of that process, and because you were able to autonomously, consciously live out that process. Because if you don't actually approach the development of personality through consciousness, through being more conscious, it's not going to happen. It doesn't happen automatically. You have to consciously individuate. You consciously integrate these things into yourself, these aspects of yourself into yourself. And so part of that is being more autonomous. And ultimately, let's say, if you live that out to its ultimate expansion, you could picture an idea where you kind of become one with God in a sense, and that's more of a, kind of mystical thing that's hard to explain. But you could see how if you were to approach that in full consciousness, so you're not just unconsciously being sucked up by the unconscious somehow. You've gotten to the stage where you've integrated all these aspects of yourself into your identity because you become aware of unconscious elements. You've actually got to the point in an alchemical sense, in alchemy, where they talk about kind of you aligning yourself with God, and Jung talks about how Christ in the biblical story, has that saying where he sees, who sees me sees the Father. And that Jung talks about that as a psychodynamic state where basically the ego is kind of replaced by God, because Christ is saying, who sees me sees the Father. You're not seeing just the typical ego. You're seeing the true identity shine through. Because ultimately, the intrinsic, innate aspect of the structure of our personality, the intrinsic pattern that we live by, is somehow nature. And that nature somehow links back down to the ultimate primordial aspect of being or mind. And so the ultimate pattern of mind, whatever ultimate being is, somehow has a correspondence with what we are and how we're expressing ourselves as an identity. So if you want to discover your true identity, ultimately it goes back to the primordial unconscious, or it goes back to God. And there is an identification in the final sense where you basically in alchemy you would become one with God, and so in that sense your true identity is God. But and that's no different. You could think of it in a more of a non-theistic way of saying that if everything is mind and the ultimate reality is mind, then the ultimate source, the primordial source of your personality and pattern of mind comes from mind at large. If all is just mind, then you come from mind at large. And, now it's getting abstract. Now we're getting into different philosophies and theories, and I don't want to lead too far away into them. But the reason I invoke that is because there is a sense of the transpersonal. There is a sense that we are connected to something beyond. And if we approach that through our autonomy, through our own volition, through our own choice, and we, out of that sense of our own identity, connect to this greater sense of identity, we find in our lives an expansion. We find more meaning in our life. And I guess in some sense, it's to fill out that larger picture of what's going on. Go, the full extent of depth psychology all the way down to the primordial mind. There are philosophical ideas out there that talk about mind as the ultimate reality, as idealism is a philosophical position that you can hold, as opposed to materialism. And, I think that is very important to talk about, because there's other quotes by Jung that I didn't read out, but that talk about, that hint at those kind of ideas. Because let me just read it out. Might as well. It's a part of interest. If you're here at the very end, we can close on something like this just to think about. So Jung says here, he says, in our experience, there are no psychic conditions which could be observed through introspection outside the human being. The behavior of the archetypes cannot be investigated at all without the interaction of the observing consciousness. Therefore, the question as to whether the process is initiated by consciousness or by the archetype can never be answered, unless, in contradiction to experience, one either robbed the archetype of its autonomy or degraded consciousness to a mere machine. We find ourselves in best agreement with psychological experience if we concede to the archetype a definite measure of independence and to consciousness a degree of creative freedom proportionate to its scope. So Jung said that in his book Psychology and Religion. And so this video has gone for quite a long time, so I don't want to completely dissect all of that, but that summarizes what I was already talking about. So there is the interplay between our conscious mind and the archetypes. And Jung's saying here that, we can't completely understand how this process of individuation is triggered. Is it by consciousness or by the archetypes? We don't know, because we only experience the archetypes through our observing consciousness. You see, and that's why I think it's important to understand these other ideas of idealism and such, because a lot of that does link down to the idea not only that everything is mind, but that, one of the most important, understandings to put forth in that philosophical space is that everything we actually know, all our scientific knowledge, all our beliefs, everything we know comes through our first-hand conscious experience. You know nothing outside your conscious experience. You think of things as some abstract idea that exists outside of your conscious experience, but everything you know, including those abstract ideas, including those propositions, including those formal ideas, all your beliefs, everything comes only through your first-hand conscious experience. You make assumptions based on your first-hand conscious experience. That's all you ever have. All science, everything is conducted through that. So in some sense, that's a radical realization of, the state of existence and the state of our relation to existence. This is all we know. These experiences we're having in our mind. And so, it's not that radical to then assume parsimoniously that everything is mind, because all we experience is in mind. We only posit that such a thing has such and such properties and is a certain way. But we all experience everything as mind, and that's all we ever experience. It's a bunch of experiences. So, linking this back down to this whole thing is, I guess I went on a bit of a tangent here. But Jung is talking about here that is actually important, because we don't know what basically triggers this process of individuation. But an aspect of it, it could be our consciousness, or it could be the archetypes. But then he says basically that he says, in contradiction to experience, one either robbed the archetype of its autonomy or degraded consciousness to a mere machine. So in other words, that links back to these ideas. If consciousness is just mechanical processes, like physicalism would say, then this process of individuation is reduced down, actually. Becoming yourself is just reduced down to a material process, and it means nothing. All the archetypes themselves are robbed of their autonomy, and they're aspects of reality that are just these kind of, mechanical processes. So you see, the philosophy eventually comes to importance here, because as you ask deeper and deeper and deeper questions, like I said, we've gone all the way from intrinsic motivation, seeing you as enjoying some task in your bedroom, and you're like, oh, I enjoy this. And we've like psychoanalyzed it, depth psychology, down through your values, down further, all the way down to, trying to understand what is the intrinsic structure of our very nature, down to, well, what is the intrinsic structure of reality? Because our nature connects to reality. But I think it's important to have these massive connection pieces, because as you connect it all, you see the significance of your life. This task you're doing that's intrinsically motivating somehow has caught your interest, that somehow is an aspect of your innate structure, that somehow is predicated on some type of ultimate reality that is also a particular structure, and somehow you're here living this out. So the meaning and significance of your life is seen in the context of all things. And so, yes. So I guess we'll end there. And I'll end it by just reminding you of the central thesis and point of the whole video, which is to find your values. To discuss, because they are, it's a little bit more specific than just saying finding who you are or finding your identity, because the values actually guide you on how to live out your identity in life, and they help you to relate the structure of who you are, the structure of your personality, of the pattern of mind that you are yourself. Your values help you to live out that pattern of yourself in reality, in actuality, to actually self-actualize. And they help you, protect you from living out someone else's idea. If everything is mind, we are all just ideas in the mind of God in some sense. But you're not, you are a particular idea. You are living that particular individuality out. You're not the same as me. Who you are is different to me. You're a different idea than I am. So your uniqueness, in every way that you were different to everyone else, that unique aspect of mind is significant. Because although we share a commonality, there is something about you that is unique. And that is the thing that lives on as you live out the full commitment to your vocation and your destiny. You have then the full realization of your selfhood, of your personality, of your intrinsic self, is completely manifested in real life, in your everyday task, through your actions, through how you live. And that's mediated through the discovery of your values. And then you will be able to, as you commit to those values, complete and fulfill your purpose and your vocation, your calling. So there you go. This one's a bit longer, but hope you loved it. And if not, let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, and or what you need clarity on, because I'm willing to do more on this, and I will do more on this, because we hit more onto autonomy, and I want to hit into other aspects like the need for relationship, because that goes into, in future videos, I'll talk about that, because Jung talks about that as important to individuation, because that really kicks into this idea of projection and working through those projections and the anima and animus, and then also there's other contemporary theories that I've mentioned in other videos about the tension between autonomy and relationship. And then Jung talks about in his books, particularly in Symbols of Transformation, the different mythological motifs of, freeing oneself from the mother, being autonomous. But there's also a need for a relationship. And relationship is so important. It's how you uncover that stage of the anima and animus. You actually find an aspect of yourself when you see yourself in relation to others and you become more conscious. So the need for relationship in something like self-determination theory, I think as a practical piece to understand how we feel connected and motivated in our life through fulfilling the need for relationship is vital. So I'm going to do that in a future video. This was the need for autonomy and how it related to, values and self-actualization. But I'm going to do one on relationship, and also one on competence, the need for competence, because that is vitally important to get your power back. So, hope you enjoy this one. See you in the next one.